So I think we have a couple more people who may be popping in. We've updated Zoom stuff, so it's a little bit different how we get them in. So I'm just going to keep an eye on that for 1 second here.
Yeah, no worries. For some reason, I can't get my camera to work on my computer, so I had to switch over to my phone.
Oh, gosh. You know, it's so funny is that with all of this technology, it's been so interesting. Like I've been the biggest anti-AirPods person, as you see them in my ears right now, right? Like my daughters wanted AirPods for 6 months and I've said, absolutely not. I'm not going to radiate your brain. There's no way, on and on and on. And then I let her get them. And then of course, as soon as this all happened, I was like, I got to go to Costco and buy some AirPods. And she looked at me like, what are you doing? But anyway.
Well, it comes in handy too if you're doing a lot of stuff online too, like with the talks, because some of the videos tell I'm like if I'm far away and I can't get for the quality of sound.
Yeah,
I feel like it's a little bit clearer than just standing back and trying to talk and do.
Yep. So anyways, we have new iPads. We've got it all right now. Like we just keep going to Costco. I don't know. Some people are buying toilet paper. We're just buying electronics. So everybody has their little glitches. Okay. So guys, we have Sheldon Sonnenberg with us, and Sheldon's a physical therapist. He's worked with elite athletes. He's worked with a range of people with injuries. I met Sheldon through a high-level coaching program that we both did last year and loved his energy, loved what he had to say. You may have seen, we taught a class together when we were on a cruise in January, pre-corona, thankfully.
I know, right?
Right? The cruise right after ours turned around and went back because people were sick. So I was like, oh my gosh, was that corona? Did we escape it just because we were healthy? But Sheldon is a great resource. So I asked him to come into our group. He's developed a process called Unlocked, and I'll let you tell more about that. But thank you for coming, Sheldon. It's great to have you here.
No, yeah, thanks for having me. And maybe just give a little quick background too, since obviously everyone here is in yoga, and my background with it. But again, physical therapy, athletic training. And I've worked in all different settings. So that's really the history of all this too and how I got started with it. But the main thing was growing up and having a lot of injuries myself. And then before I knew it, I was like, if I wanted to be active long-term, I probably should figure this out because all the injuries were adding up. And I was like, this isn't going to work too well, too long-term if I can't even figure out my own body. So that's really how I got into going into physical therapy and athletic training. And then, working with college professional teams, traveling. And then after a while, just that kind of entrepreneur mindset, kind of want to venture off my own and I love traveling, and you just can't always do that with teams because you're pretty much kind of one-on-one with them the year round. So I went back and moved. I'm from Texas, so I moved back to Austin, and one of the main gyms in downtown Austin I worked at, did physical therapy there with clients, and then also taught classes. And one of the big things was we'd work out really hard during the week, and then we'd do yoga on Sundays. And it was just kind of like our recovery. And that was probably really my biggest, I'd say my first exposure to get into yoga and what it did for the body. And, I've always really been big on, injury prevention type stuff, but also just in general, how, it made me feel. So I was like, this really works. And I started incorporating a lot of it into my physical therapy practice with clients with injuries. And then it really just, really opened my mindset to a lot of different things. And so just the philosophy of it. But moving forward, I ended up working with a guy from Holland, and he taught me a lot of different things. So really just, it kind of just all came together. And before I knew it, I was like, you know what, this is a great approach to really understanding the body as a whole, and, how to go in there and hit it from all different angles. Cause there's never really just one answer, I think we all know this now too. Like, if you're into yoga, you're into fitness and stuff like that. If there wouldn't always be the same questions popping up and, the problems, concerns. So it's kind of just treating the body as a whole and really understanding a lot of principles to it. And so, basically what I did was I went back and just looked back. I was like, okay, from my own mindset too. And what I went through personally, and then how it related to what I was wanting to do was saying, okay, from a physical therapy standpoint, athletic training, strength conditioning, nutrition, and then just wrapping it all together. That's really, and then again, with my personal experiences, how I came out with Unlocked. And what it was just how taking an approach of saying, you know, when you, and a lot of it, honestly, I learned a lot of this from going through yoga. And so it was saying, okay, I understand the nervous system, how it works, the muscles, the bones. And so you kind of think about this, you got a lot of different practices out there. And so everyone has their own piece of the puzzle. So you have, you know, maybe your chiropractor, massage, yoga, acupuncture, physical therapy, all different areas that kind of come in there and try to treat their own part of the body. But at the end of the day, we all have the same goal, is, you know, trying to align our bodies up to the proper posture, trying to get everything working together and functioning together. And so that was like, you know what, if I could go in there and just figure out, and I learned this actually at the end from our conference there in Nashville a year ago. So I was, you know, I don't suffer a whole lot with low back pain, but I've been really, I think, good learning these principles in treating low back pain because of that. And so, you know, kind of going, I had this, I call it Unlocked now, but it's kind of like basically the whole mindset of going into that, not this past one in Nashville, but the year before, going into it and saying, okay, how do I take my message out there and take it from a hands-on approach, but going into, you know, to where they can learn online or learn, you know, just talking with people. Because I knew how to do it with hands, but, you know, trying to like explain it to people like, okay, go do this, go do that is very tough. And then, so Russell, you know, when he said at the conference, he's like, if you can just find that one big domino and knock down that one domino, it knocks down everything else. I was like, so I really started thinking about that. And that's when I really got into kind of just things I learned in yoga, things I've learned, you know, just other areas of therapy, and kind of started back with the core. And then that's when, you know, that week I had low back pain, you know, going into that whole week, and it's so frustrating and miserable. And I was like, but here's the thing. And it was one of those that I didn't suffer a lot with low back pain, but I've had this happen before, like a few times before, whereas, you know, it's the point where like, okay, you know, I was pretty miserable for a few weeks, but this thing lasted for a good week. And I was like, I've got to figure that out. And I took that same principle and I took everything else I'd learned from other concepts and what I was doing and said, you know what I'm going to do is really think about the strategy, not get so detailed in the tactical, like the little details of, okay, I'm going to go do this stretch or this stretch, but that like one big domino, and then just start thinking about that. And I was like, okay, you know, when you kind of bring it all back down, I was like, it's at the core, our core center. And I was thinking like the big bones control the small bones. And you know, you know, from going through yoga and doing a lot of different practices, and I was like, okay, I could tell the difference that it made me feel going through it from injury, not just my back, but shoulder, everything. And so I was like, you know what, it's just going back to basics. And then really physical therapy, all it is just it's just a game of physics. And so it's just forces. And if you kind of understand one thing, it's like a tug of war in the body. I was like, if I could get the pelvic bone that can basically, the bigger bone controls the small spine bones, you know, get that in control, your bigger muscles, your quads, hamstrings, hip flexors, all that good stuff. If I can get all that, you know, working together, then it's going to, you know, it makes the alignment of your pelvis your spine, less pressure to it and everything else. And so I kind of just went with that same philosophy and principle moving forward and saying, you know what, I'm going to take that concept, and then now it's easier to explain to people, you know, what we're doing hands-on in the clinic. And then that was really kind of the process of it going through. And so, so a lot of stuff like we did that day on the cruise, which was really fun, was we took you know, so here's the thing is like I always say, it's like, you know, everyone's like, I hate stretching or I hate doing stuff. I'm like, realistically, it's like, and then there's a lot of research out, at least a lot of therapists say, is like, well, stretching is pointless. And I'm like, well, no, you know, so I think it's just understanding the body and really knowing that you can't just go in and all of a sudden, like, for example, if I'm going to go stretch right now, it's, you know, I'm not warmed up. I haven't been moving around, haven't been doing the motion. And so it's, our nervous system is going to fight it. And so, so basically like going through and going through yoga movements, going through some active movements, some kind of active warm up, then, you know, it's basically like your complementer. It's kind of like the waves in the ocean. So, you know, everything kind of finds that rhythm. And so you basically can, you know, release that, get the nervous system to calm down, to relax, get blood flow going into the area. Then you get more you can go do your stretch, and you're in congruency with you know, the rest of the body and how you can basically be more productive there. So that was kind of at least that worked the best for me. And then I started applying it to all the clients with the low back pain and or other injuries. And so Unlocked was like, okay, we started with since low back was probably one of the most common ones, that was one of the ones we started focusing on and had a lot of success with it. and then just going through a lot of different movement patterns that we do in yoga, and then I'll combine it with physical therapy movements, and then kind of taking that approach of, so I'm going to just go real quick. I don't want to take up too much of your time, and you feel free to jump in and if you want me to say anything in particular, but I kind of just broke it into a couple phases, because I was always trying to figure out, I was like, how do I, what do people want? What's going to help them the most? And because there's so much out there. And then, so I asked a lot of questions, and then finally everyone's like, well, I think one of the main questions was not really knowing kind of what to do as far as workouts go, and or where to start and stuff like that. And so I kind of broke it down one day into, what was the main thing that, I looked at when I went to go work out. And when I go work out, it's always kind of like, okay, it's more like functional fitness. So I love to work out, but at the same time, I'm like, is this going to help me or hurt me? And is it, as an age, is this the appropriate thing to do? And so I broke it down in 3 phases. And the first phase was taking kind of that simple approach to what we do. It sounds so simple, but it's really effective of, starting with mobility. So if someone comes in and they're, they have a certain injury, and this could apply to their neck, their back, their shoulder, whatever it is, then phase 1 was mobility of the joints, flexibility of muscles, strengthening, and balance. And then phase 2 is looking at different, you're not just going through, say someone has an injury. Here's what I think what most people get caught up in, what I loved about yoga was you're going through the 3 planes of motion. So it wasn't, most people at the gym, they don't think about this, but even at work, they're constantly going through a certain range of motion, meaning, or a pattern, they're going sagittal plane, like front and back. So let's just say, for example, when we walk, we're usually always walking forward. We're not walking backwards. So we're always going in this front to back. And then you look at all the machines at the gym or a lot of activities, it's always in this motion here. There's not much side to side or rotational. So that was phase 2, was your 3 planes motion. And then the third phase was then you bring into, because a lot of people are concerned about diet and then, how that affects their body, is you're looking at the energy systems. And so everyone's going to have a different, type of activity here, whether it's they're the high intensity or more endurance type stuff. And then you can bring that in. You can go way more detailed into that with like your macronutrients, your carbs, proteins, and fats. So that was really the kind of way of at least breaking it down into a bigger picture. And then you could always, from there, depending on what that person needed, go more detailed with it.
Yeah, amazing. So what would you say, Sheldon, is we've got mostly yogis on the call.
Yeah.
And I know I even asked you on the cruise, because one of the people in our program had asked, they were told they had some neck issues, and they were told, I wasn't going to call you out, Sarah, but I saw you. And they were told, don't do anything. So often I think we're told when we get an injury, don't move.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thought on that?
Yeah. So so honest, like every person that has an injury or they're dealing with something, that's probably the worst thing you do is not move. It's just and again, it's not an easy answer, because here's the thing is and that's kind of where I kept trying to backtrack, is like, what's the one main thing? Because it is easy because the body is so complicated. There's so many different factors in there to get overwhelmed and be like, I'm so frustrated. So here's the deal. It's like everyone, if you think about this, and this is what my big secret to like, how do you address someone and break it all down is knowing their hand dominance. And it's so simple, but people don't think about this, but this is the one thing that they always go through on a daily basis. So if I'm right-handed and I'm always going into, especially you start adding a certain sport or a job-related activity, a lot of surgeons I'd have, they're always looking down with their neck and doing surgery or whatever it was, they always go into a certain pattern. Oh, the thing with, I guess kind of like redirect to where your question as far as your don't move is, the day you stop moving, you kind of feed into the problem. And so here's what I always tell people is like, you just keep it simple. Is like, if you're going to move, have control of the speed of motion with it, and or limit how heavy the weight is away from your body. Because your arms, it's basically, it's a lever system. The further you go out from you, the force has to go somewhere, where that's why they always say like your core takes the center of the work. Well, if you think about your neck, if you have something holding in your arms, that's kind of like the core for your hands here, because the weight's coming back to the neck of whatever you're holding. So that's a simple approach, but really the reality of it is you've got to keep moving, but at the same time you want to that's what I love about yoga is you break up patterns both directions. You're not always with that, like that hand dominance, always going in that one direction. You're doing multiple directions. So if it's too painful, going through the motions, then you modify it. And whether you don't go, basically you don't go as far through the motion, you decrease the speed of motion, and or, if someone's in the gym lifting weights, doing stuff, then you say, okay, lower the amount of weight and go into higher reps. The big thing too is thinking about, if someone gets stagnant and they just quit moving. Now, if it's a torn muscle or something that's like severe, where like they had we've had a couple, like we're in a car accident or something, I still tell them, like, yeah, you got to keep moving. But if they had like a torn ligament, whereas like, hey, if you move, you're going to be paralyzed. Now, if that's the case, then yeah, you want to follow parameters or protocol with the brace and that kind of stuff. That's a whole different situation. Now, if it's something that's just painful, again, then you just say, okay, simplistic, I just decrease the range of motion, how fast I'm going, how much weight I'm doing. I still keep moving, because movement keeps the blood flow going. It keeps nutrients going in and out of there to speed up the recovery process. But it also keeps your nervous system active. When you stop moving and you stay in one place, you let gravity to control you, and all of your ligaments, muscles, tendons, bones kind of get into a contracted position that your nervous system was used to going in that pattern because of the hand dominance. And all of a sudden things tighten up. They tighten up and tighten up. And I'll give you one example. It's not specific to the neck, but it's related to the whole situation, because you can apply the same concept and strategy. Is, since we've been sitting at home more, I'm kind of sitting on a hard bar stool, and I haven't been up. I've been stretching and doing stuff, but it's not like going, it's just not like going to the gym or going out and doing work stuff. So I'm not constantly moving. So now, I can tell things are starting to creep up, and I can tell it's because I'm, because I'm right-handed. My left shoulder I can start feeling little aches and pains and tightness here. My right knee, and it's the same pattern. It's a zigzag, goes right down the body, depending on your hand dominance of where, basically what joint and what injury you're going to have. So yeah, the biggest thing is you've got to keep moving. If it's painful, maybe you always try to try to reverse it and say, okay, where's the pain at? Where's the pain at? Most people in the neck, to be honest with you, it's because of so I'm gonna say this again, it's because of the hand dominance, but it's because of the rib cage. And so people don't think about this, but one of the things I learned working in the clinic along a lot of neck and back patients, they come in and they were so rigid, they were so tight, like their neck, they're like trying to, and your ribs aren't going to be like this spring, but when you breathe, you should be able to they open up, they expand, and they close whenever you breathe out. And so it became like, it was like a hard rock. And they're lay on I know it's not funny, but it was kind of like, we would always joke in the clinic. So I'm thinking it's a couple of people, but they'd lay on the bench, and then we were, basically stretching out their legs, doing other stuff. I was like, geez, it's solid rock in here. Like, no wonder. And because what happens, so for example, maybe try to turn here so you can see, but if you, if I'm right-handed, this is a typical pattern, is someone's going to rotate, goes opposite direction. So pelvis goes one way and the shoulders do. So you're basically, your ribs, thinking my fingers as the ribs, they kind of do this rotational pattern. And so when they redirect, that pushes the shoulder blades out. So then your shoulder blades get popped out. The muscles that go on the shoulder blades, your rotator cuff, become more of they get strained because they're getting pulled. I always say, it's like you take a rag and you wring a rag. That's the example of what your body's doing, because that's why it's always under stress and under tension. That's why people don't realize it, but they're constantly keeping their nervous system under tension and stress whenever they're in that kind of that position with their body. And then that's why you always feel so good after you do yoga, because you just release all the muscle tension, stress, and all that tension off the nervous system. But what it does is also, because the ribs shift and your shoulder blades get pushed out. You think about when I was talking about your pelvis going, one way or the other, depending on your hand dominance. Well, your spine does the same thing, because if your house, your foundation's offset, so is your house. And so you're basically, this kind of sucks here. Let me get so I can show you better picture. But basically, like with your pelvis, if I'm right-handed and I'm always constantly doing something right-handed, then it gets stuck almost. Does that make sense? Where like it kind of rotates. And then so our bodies don't naturally stay that way. Like, you're not going to walk and then you just, So, but when your pelvis is that way, then naturally our body to stay kind of upright because of gravity, it rotates. And that's where you get that shift in the rib cage. And then you think about all that torque. So pelvis goes one way, your spine and your ribs go the opposite direction to counter that force of the curve. So all of a sudden there's that twist effect that goes up to the neck. So it's it really just if you look at a rag and just grab a rag and wring it, that's what everyone's body looks like from head to toe almost, if you looked underneath their skin and their muscle. And that's why when they get the images on the MRI on the spine, which is it looks kind of crazy, is like, because that's the side effect of everything else that's going on. So I know it's a long answer for why you keep moving, but here's the thing is, if you keep moving, you just allow, if you stop moving, you allow gravity to take over that force pressing down. You allow the force of your body weight and whatever weight you're holding from the ground pushing up, and all of a sudden it squeezes us. And then we stay in that stuck position, and then it's just, again, it's just stagnation, and then you have less blood flow, less nutrients to that area to heal and or flush out all the toxins that's causing the inflammatory process. So yeah, it's like, you just got to keep moving. That's why the body is more vibrant when it's moving. Now, not to say that, so here's the thing, is like, not to say it's not gonna be painful at sometimes depending on what you're doing, but it can be you gotta be smart about what movements you're doing, if that makes sense.
Sarah, did that answer some?
Now, if you have any specific questions, definitely I can, what on the neck or.
Well, and I've told you this, is that my neck, that C4, 5, 6, and 7 have degenerative discs. And so I'm right-handed. It's the left side of my neck and shoulder. So I'm exactly like torqued. I have a much harder time, like in yoga, turning one way than the other. And I can feel like I always pop ribs out, like the rib head pops out. So I always go to the chiropractor. And I'm guessing that that's probably just because I'm so twisted that they just, like, that pattern of movement just keeps going back.
And that can be for sure. It's like how do you say this? The hardest part, I think, in answering, I really don't know if there's like again, there's never one great answer to this, but like one, like, that's going to say, okay, this is going to fix it. Cause I feel like there's multiple things that people have to do and see. It's kind of like trial and error. You always hate to say that. But it really is with our bodies a lot of times, because everyone's body is so different. But if you take that one basic principle and okay, so then you have a game plan. Like, okay, my hand dominance, I'm always going through this certain pattern, things rotate. What can I do to counter that? And so then maybe start adding in some, so like, for example, what we'll do is have the clients lay on their side. You ever seen the gator where you're laying on your side, you're doing like the T rotations where you're opening up, and just some basic stuff. So you're basically trying to, I know a lot of this is like a lot of similar movements that you do in yoga, but it's kind of it's about repetition. So maybe, so you're laying on your side, and I can always make a little video if you are, post pictures of the exercise, but explain it better. But you're basically going through the T and the Y, I call it like letters, trying to open up and then get the rib cage moving, and over time trying to equal out the pattern. Same thing you do in yoga. It's a lot slower because you're laying on you're just laying there going through the motion, versus actually kind of more of a fluid action as far as within yoga. So it is like, so you're trying to cue that nervous system to say, because if not, repetition is your body is gonna keep wanting to go into that same pattern, and that's what kind of pulls it out.
Yeah.
That, or here's one thing I would say maybe look at doing too so here's what I've seen too, and a lot of, again, has to do with so this gets a little bit more deep, but so the SI joint was one of the and I still don't understand this, but when I was working with this guy from Holland, this is really what taught me everything. It's like, and this was kind of like depressing, but it's good at the same time, because he goes, you can take everything you learned here in the US and throw it in the trash. And I'd been doing this for like 13 years, and I was like, okay. It's so, but he was kind of like, it was frustrating, but it's also kind of like true at the same time, because the American approach to healthcare is so different than in other countries. And so and his thought process was different, the way they learned in school. And so every time he'd say something it's kind of frustrating because I was like, I don't quite understand it, but I do. But then I was like, so I was trying to like wrap it with what we were taught versus what they're taught. And then finally it kind of clicked. But what I liked about what his approach was the same thing I learned with the people's like before working with him. I was in a clinic at the Spine Institute where I noticed everyone's the rib cage was like solid rock. Like they had no mobility within their thoracic area. And so a lot of stuff he would say, I was like, okay, these are the answers to all the questions I kept having. I was like, this makes sense. Why? But no one would ever address it. And it was never part of anyone's protocol for treating their other injuries. And so, but then he did a lot of stuff with the SI joint. And then we learned like the connection with the nervous system was just a whole nother level. And still like stuff that I've asked people, and I don't know the answer to, and a lot of people don't know the answer to, but basically what would happen, again, the hand dominance, if your pelvis got off shift it, and then your SI, because again, everything moves together, both sides. So it's never just like, okay. And here's the problem with the American treatment is like, it's like, okay, well, let's just work on that one area. I'm like, you can't just work on the one area. The body works as a whole. So you have to treat it as a whole. And so that was the main thing, is like when the pelvis would shift, the SI joint would shift, and then one joint, they're kind of like plates. So they kind of sit on, so one joint would shift one way and one would go the other way. And then what would end up happening is, it would somehow just shut the nervous system off on that one leg, meaning you would still have strength in it, but your reaction time, and you go manual muscle test someone, like if you're right-handed, then you would, so basically if someone was right-handed, tendency was, they would always say, I feel like I'm strong in my left leg, but they never were when you do all the manual muscle testing. And then it would limit their strength there. So what I found was a lot of times too, like even, with people with neck issues and, with their shoulder issues all the way going up to the neck or the head, a lot of it came down to their pelvis was offset left and right, and they had maybe a restricted SI joint on the left side, but also weak legs, meaning maybe they just needed some more like band work or hip work or whatever it was in their legs. Because like almost everyone that came into the clinic and 40s or 50s, they were still young people, but they couldn't even lunge, like kneel down and stand back up. Their legs were so weak. I was like, for me, maybe it was part of the strength conditioning background, but I was trying to tell, I was like, if you can't even, if you bend over to pick something up and your leg's not strong enough to hold your upper body, then there's going to be a shift in the back, and no wonder your back hurts, or, there's always constant, they're getting offset. So that was one thing I think with neck pain and shoulder pain was there was some kind of lack of movement in their SI joint, their hips. So hip mobility was the main thing, left and right. But then again, that had to do with hand dominance and then strength of the legs.
That's fascinating. I mean, I think that to look at it and think, and the thing is that we see people that come in who maybe will try a class and they're 40 and they're like, no, I can't do this. And they give up. And I know there's a lot of people who aren't even willing, which, to be young and to be that unable to do some basic functional things that are necessary.
And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be extreme, because I think right now it's like now that I'm in Florida, it's a lot different than in Texas. In Texas, my parents, we grew up on a farm. So the lifestyle there is totally, and then every state's totally different as far as their background of working out and doing some kind of exercise. And so I had to coming over the years, like, okay, I understand, like, they're not as motivated to want to be healthy or do something, but it's just, that's why I call it maybe like functional fitness, functional movement. Just so, like, just in general, can you sit to stand? It sounds basic, but can you go up and down the stairs? Because at the end of the day, it's like, that's everyone that they end up saying is like, well, and then let's just say like real life problems. So like sitting in a chair at work is ruins their day, or standing ruins their day, or getting out of the bed, or picking up their grandkid. It's just like all the things that, so then it's just like trying to wrap around like, okay, how can I help these people the most? And then so that's where I had to go in there and say, look, you don't have to be like unless, ideally you are active with your health and your fitness, but at the end of the day, it's like do some kind of basic movements, because it's like use it or lose it concept with the nervous system just as much as with the muscles. Because when you quit activating your muscles and quit using stuff, then our body tendency is to just, unfortunately, as we age and the way our bodies are, things become less elastic. there's less movement and or production of hormones. So our organs aren't doing the job that they should be. And we also, just become, so then there's more, so less movement, you have I always broke it down. And so the other day I did, I think, a video on like the seven main ways like you detox your body. And so like your lungs, liver, lymphatic system, blood, kidney, skin, and then your intestines. And I was talking about like each one. I was like, okay, now if you could do something important to, we went back to movement, like each one, like which one would be, how you would detoxify, and whether it's diet related, with movement, with exercise. And it came down to all the basic things that we do, from a healthier diet to movement to exercise. And literally that was the easiest, like the best way to detox your body. And so, because when people age and they're in pain or they're stiff or whatever it is, because they put all this off and they didn't do like little things just over a period of time, all of a sudden, I don't know if you've ever read that book. I'm blanking on the name right now, but it was, I think it was Darren Hardy, but it was, oh geez, I'm going to blank on it now. Anyways, he was talking about I'll think of it here in a second, but he's basically talking about the little things that you do over a period of time, how exponentially it increases like the effects of it long term. And so basically it was saying like, if you could just do like a little couple simple things. And so that when I started with a lock thing, like with the clients with low back pain, I was like, okay, here's 3 exercises. If you just did this like 1 minute a day, then it would keep your hips opened up and your back released, so that you could, and I'd use myself I did this with myself. So I could, like after that conference, I was like, I got to figure out a simple way. And then really, because that's where we always figure out stuff, is if we can apply it to ourselves and what our problems are, then more than likely other people having the same problems, and how do you help them? And so that was where I was like, okay, these 3 exercises, do it one, within a minute, something simple people can do. And so if you apply that simple principle over a period of time, then it's easier for people to understand, okay, all of a sudden that exponential factor is not hitting them really hard at the end of the day. And they're suffering from all these effects, because what ends up happening, unfortunately, as your bodies, as we age, become less elastic, everything tightens up. Then you can't move as much. Then you can't get the toxins out of your body as easily. Your body kind of starts shutting down quicker. And so the toxins build up in the body, and then all of a sudden the amount of acid builds up in the body. And what's the first basic thing you can find in the body is calcium, and that's from your bones. And so then that's why you start hearing people become osteoporotic. Then it starts relating to the nerve health. So because of all the medications that they've been on, the poor diet's eating up their nervous system. And so their conduction of the sheath of the nerves that cause it to conduct is basically is lessened. So their balance goes downhill. And so they lose their balance, they fall, they break a hip. So you kind of see the same thing over and over, to where it's so simple once you look at it from a whole perspective and say, wow, if this person just would have done a little bit of exercise throughout their life, or maybe some simple things eating wise, how they could have saved all these problems. And then you can kind of compare it to some, maybe someone that's active, like within your group or any other group that's out there working out, and compare their lifestyle and the health issues that they face long term.
So what would you say are those 3 exercises that someone should do if they?
So yeah, I can give those to you. So the main one was, are you familiar with windshield wipers? And these, again, they're very basic, but here's the thought process in it. So when you're laying on your back with your knees bent, you're doing your windshield wipers, you have your feet about shoulder width apart, because the further your feet are, then you can bring those legs into a larger range of motion. Because here's the goal is, the nervous system, we learn this when working with stroke patients, is there's 3 things that your body responds to when there's increased tone, meaning tightness. Like when you have to try to loosen up something, the 3 main things are weight bearing. So you're putting weight to that joint, you're activating those joint receptors, telling the nervous system to say, hey, it's kind of like a trigger point. That's why I tell people, is like, think about this, like you got a trigger point, something's tight, you go in there and you push on it real hard, then it releases the tension. So weight bearing to the area. Vibration. So unless you have one of those like vibe plates or something like where you're just like shaking yourself, that one's kind of a harder one to get. So so weight bearing, vibration, and then sorry, I blanked on this one. I talk about it all the time, and now I'm let me think. Weight bearing, vibration, and rotation. And so rotation, so that was the reason for that exercise is so you're laying on your back with your knees bent, and you have your feet shoulder width apart, and you're just going side to side. So as simple as it sounds, like, you know, call them windshield wipers. You're basically that rotation. You got to think about every joint in your, and not in just even in your joints, but your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments. There's receptors that feed back to the nervous system. So if I'm laying there and I'm rotating side to side, and that's why, you know, after you feel so relaxed after yoga, then you're telling those receptors to relax that area. And then all of a sudden, because of that pelvis, the way it shifted before, you take the femur, because you basically doing that rotational, it tells that capsule where it's locked in there, and that area to relax, and all of a sudden that pelvis can more self-neutralize its position, if that makes sense. So the windshield wiper side to side. The second one I would say was pretty simple, is your knee to chest. As basic as that sound is you're pulling your knee to your chest. And here's the reason why is most people don't think about this, but when they do, they go lay on their back and they're honest about it, and they say, okay, I pull my left knee to my chest and then my right one, and they compare sides. It's usually offset a little bit, because when that pelvis is rotated, you know, and you're walking throughout the day and you have a rotated pelvis, basically what happens is your femurs go with it. And so when you pull your knee to your chest, they're both kind of moving at a different motion, front to back. So that's the second one. And then the third one is laying on the back and just pulling your knee over sideways. So really you're hitting all three, the main motions of like the hip. So the first one, the windshield wipers, you're doing the side to side, the rotational. The second one, the knees to chest, you're moving. And then that third one is side to side. So it's just going in there and then basically trying to release that tension around the hips to let that pelvis relax in a more neutral position. And then again, there's other exercises for the thoracic area to kind of loosen up there. But that once you get your house back, your foundation back in a more neutral position, going up the chain to your upper back, to your shoulders, your neck, there's less tension, less pressure.
Awesome.
But yeah, I can get you those exercises if you want, because like I said, they're so simple, but they're the main ones. And everyone that ever comes into the clinic that's ever had any back issues and or neck, when they go through these, more than likely, you know, it's one that's, they notice it. I mean, at least there's a discrepancy in the left and right side, put it that way.
Wow. So what other questions do you guys have?
When is this virus going to be over?
Oh, go ahead. What do you recommend for exercises for thoracic mobility?
For the thoracic?
Mm-hmm.
So that one is like I call them the T's and Y's. So laying on your side. So if I'm laying on my side, and you always want the head, like especially with the T, and I'll probably easier just to make a video or put the pictures in there, but you're basically laying on, have you seen the gator? They call them the gators, and they're real, you lay on your side with your knees bent, and then with your head and your hand, you just open it up to that side. Now, usually if you're right-handed, it's going to be harder on your left side, because again, that when I'm right-handed, it's the way things kind of get shifted in our body. You'll be able to notice a difference in left and right side as far as how our shoulders get pulled and how that pulls on the neck. But so the T is straight out because you open up like the letter T, and then the Y is just down a little bit lower. So probably be easier if I post those exercises. You can kind of see the thing. So that's kind of hitting it more from when you're doing a relationship with your hips and pelvis, because that's something I always try to think about too, is like, you know, there's strategies sometimes when you go through all this, is saying, if I really want to, you know, I can do an exercise for full body motion, and then maybe like it's a yoga movement where you're going, you know, just different patterns. Or maybe I want to be specific and say, I really want to work more on my thoracic or my shoulder. Well, if I'm laying on my side with my knees bent and I keep them, you know, my legs don't move, that helps, you know, lock the lower back. And then I'm only moving my upper body and really focusing on. So not to get too in depth, but maybe this will help. But so when you think about your spine, each bone is shaped different, going from your lumbar, your low back, to the middle back, the thoracic, to the cervical. And so so I've got my pelvis, and then with your lumbar, each vertebrae going up, that they're stacked like puzzle pieces. They sit on top of each other, kind of like with, they connect where they're only meant for flexion extension, if that makes sense. As you go up to the thoracic and the neck, the bones are shaped to where they're more for rotation. That's why people, have the most rotation in their neck. And then you're not supposed to rotate at your low back because that'd be bad things. So it's just more of a flexion extension at the back. But then you'll notice, like if I just, and that's why like when we do a lot of core strengthening hip stuff too, is have, let me see if I can, without dropping this, is basically like if I'm doing like some hip stuff here, is have them hips and knees slightly bent so that when we're doing rotational stuff, it's just their upper body that's rotating. So it's just the upper body is actually because of the way the bones line up, not the lumbar area. So when you're laying on your back and you're doing the T's and Y's, that's we're working and you want to complement the motion of the way your bones go is basically what I guess I was trying to say, because you're not trying to force the bones to go in a non-natural movement. And then you can do like, down dog, up dog, different movements like that is obviously important. I call it like with the prayer stretch, side to side. So here's the thing is what I've learned is it's so much, that's why I was like, it goes back to the basics. Like if you can always relate it back to, the more I get mobility in my hips and then the alignment of my pelvis, that's always going to have control on how it cringes, because you add in that hand dominance and how, if your lower body, your pelvis and your legs go in one way and your upper body goes the opposite direction, your ribs are always getting pulled and tweaked in that direction. Mm-hmm. And so that's honestly the easiest approach, is just playing the game of forces. That's why I'm like, therapy is just, it's a game. And then same thing with working out, of, okay, what's going to have the most pull, that one big domino. Then always any kind of injury I have or exercise, I'm like, okay, going back to, and then sometimes it's just moving and being like, just kind of like saying, okay, I can tell, my upper body there's the counter is what's going on in my lower body, if that makes sense. So it's if you can get your lower body, the hips, the hip mobility in control, and then kind of going back to, that's why I say go back to those 3-man exercises, like the windshield wipers, rotational, knees to chest, that one where you're pulling straight over. Then it's so much, you got a good kind of, it's not gonna be like one, like the perfect answer, but once you have that good general hip mobility, then it allows, and then that pelvis and that SI, because it works in correlation with your SI joint. And so then that pelvis can kind of relax into a more neutral position. Here's the crazy thing is you see people's strength all of a sudden expedite throughout the roof. And this is what when I had I'm trying to think, this kid that came in with an ACL tear. And so I was like, this is crazy, because I can apply this to the whole, which is with a lot of athletes. I was like, I can apply the same concept to the whole athletic industry as far as prevention of ACL tears and or different like plantar fasciitis or knee or, different knee injuries and hip, everything. That's where I was like, this is hard just to say this for the back, because once you understand that relationship and that all of a sudden you're nervous, your hips back in alignment, their strength when you went and then retested someone was solid. Like they were just like all of a sudden like Superman or Superwoman, like it was crazy. And so I was like, I knew right there when he came in with the ACL tear, I was like, I bet, his hips are offset and the alignment's off. And sure enough, we tested them and, just the rotational was off. So, it plays into everything from your strength of the activation of your nervous system, but it's just, again, going back to the basics, do things line up, are they, and then, so that's where I think everyone's body is a little bit different because, we all have kind of a different physique as far as some people are really tall. And I was like, that's, some people stretch more, some don't, there's a lot of kind of like different factors, but at the end of the day, it's always about going back to that alignment, getting that hip back in position, your femur, the hip mobility back in. So once those line up, then all your joints around there can line up. And then again, that connection, I'm not really sure, 100% sure on how that all works. Whenever there's that connection to the SI joint and the nervous system, like lights are back on in your body and everything lights back up and their strength is good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating about the increase in strength.
Yeah, it was really an eye opener, because that was my biggest, trying to take away that message and say, okay, now you can apply this to everyone from kind of understanding why so many kids, like, you know, for injuries. And that people don't think about this, but like, it's because I growing up too, is like, it is harder because when you're in group programs, you're all thrown together as a group, like go do this, go do that. There's never any, and you don't really have time to individualize. And so it's more, I think, you know, on the parents' line, but again, if they don't know this, but is, you know, what's common is you got your ACL tears, not just high school, but college, professional. And then there's so many simple things that they could apply. And I think a lot more, you know, as time goes on, a lot more programs are more open to, you know, to yoga, to stretching, they're starting to slowly kind of come out and realize, you know, hey, you know, it's more of a common idea than it was before.
Sure. So with some, like with, as you're talking about athletes, it's basically the same thing that you would suggest for them to do is what you're suggesting. Is that correct?
Yes. And so that was the neat thing, is like, I could take that same principle and strategy and apply it to anyone. So for example, no matter what age group. And so that was the cool thing. It was like, there wasn't a restriction on age group, because at the end of the day, you know, even though we're all different, we're all the same in a lot of ways too. So, you know, no matter the age group, whether it's a high school, college, professional, whether it's an athlete, maybe it was someone, again, maybe they're not athletic, maybe it's just someone, you know, a work related back pain, neck pain, elbow pain. And here was one thing that, you know, and partly too is, so before I was working, like, you know, in that clinic, and the guy, I'd moved to Florida, and I was driving I moved all my stuff from Texas. I was thinking it was like 17 hours, but I remember getting here, and then over the first week, I had this extreme pain going down my left arm. And I could tell it was the ulnar nerve, because I started getting a little numbness, tingling. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was so frustrated. I was like, this is stupid, because I'm a therapist. Why can't I figure this out? And so I was doing all sorts of stretches, and then I could feel like parts that, you know, was getting tight. And I went and met with a surgeon. I was like, hey, you know, I think it's, you know, something's restricted in there somewhere. And he was wanting to cut on it, but I really wasn't. I was like, no, there's got to be a better answer. And so the guy I was working with, you know, he's like, yeah, he goes, it's your ribs are out of place. I was like, what? It's like, my forearm's hurting. He's like, no. And so we did that whole thing, and then it made sense. I was like, okay, well, you know, because it's just a whiplash effect. If you can't get the pelvis and the hip mobility under control, it all goes up to the neck, all the way to the, you know, everything's offset. So what ends up happening is, you know, I'm just going to, you know, if I'm kind of like in a rotated position, everything else is having to work that much harder to, if that makes sense, to counter what's going on at the bottom. So if I had the end of a whip and then, you know, hit it, you know, the force at the end of the whip. So everything out your body is compensated, whether you know it or not. Majority of people don't feel it until they do something that exacerbates it or makes it worse. And so, you know, for me, probably because I was leaning, you know, on the car door or whatever, something, you know, whatever in that position, driving. So there's always something that in someone's lifetime, if they're not constantly, and this kind of goes back to your question of keep moving, if they're not constantly moving, and like right now too, like if I'm not moving as much and getting up every day, stretching and going exercise, go run or whatever it is, yoga stretches, then basically what I start feeling more in the tight spots, either from previous injuries, because here's the deal, is like, unfortunately, sometimes when you have an injury before, or maybe tore something, or, you know, things are never like normal again, or, you know, again, going to that rotational pattern. Is like, if we don't keep moving, you don't keep things getting stretched out. So it's easier for them to tighten back into their patterns than you to experience that pain more. So yeah, you can apply that to, you know, just in general. It doesn't matter what injury. It could be a wrist injury, carpal tunnel. It could be a forearm, elbow. So I always say is like, that was the thing is like, if you could, you know, you could always almost, not 100%, but someone could just come up to me and tell me their hand dominance. I could tell them probably either what's going on or what's going to happen. And if they said like work related stuff, but then you could say, okay, well, you know, here's the big deal is yes, maybe your wrist hurts, maybe you have carpal tunnel, maybe your elbow, your shoulder. Then you still want to do, you know, the basics for that one area, but as a whole, because your body works as a whole, and because the forces get distributed out throughout the whole body, head to toe, and you take the plane, the gravity and the forces coming up. Then you say, okay, let's go all the way back down. Let's know, like we know, okay, you're right, left-handed, whatever. And then, so we go back all the way down to your hips, your core, kind of get that reset, because that's where it all starts. Because even though we may still want to address the area where they're hurting, if you never fix the problem, it's gonna come back later on and or get worse. And that's why, with my low back patients too, like that's why you always hear like, okay, 90% of people say their low back pain surgery fell. It's like your surgery didn't fail. It's just that wasn't the reason you needed surgery. I mean, sometimes there are cases that they do have a disc disease or something was wrong with their disc. But here's the thing is, reality is when you go look at any X-ray or MRI, and then people get that because of media or doctors, everyone has it. So like, and maybe honestly, I think it's just kind of a lack of understanding. They're so concerned about what their MRI X-ray says. But I was like, it doesn't really matter what your MRI X-ray says. That's just the image of what's going on underneath and the problem underneath. So if you don't get your mobility back into play, that's why they're having the failed surgeries. And because that may, when they look at the MRI, the X-ray, X-ray MRI, all they're seeing is that spot where it's being, so if I had, again, my pelvis is kind of shifted, then what's going to happen is the pelvis goes one way, your spine is going to go the opposite, to kind of counter the force. And so all of a sudden they just take an image of that one spot that's being irritated.
So a lot of people, they come in and they say, oh, my low back hurts, I need to stretch it. So that's probably the opposite of what they need to do.
Oh, so again, so about like coming in and say.
So if people come in and they have low back pain, right? Like that's the most common thing that people show up with. Mm-hmm. And they think like, oh, I need to stretch. And invariably we see people stretch, their hamstrings are super tight. So they're more doing like a rounded hump through their thoracic spine. Mm-hmm. Thinking that they're going to stretch their low back. And even if they stretch their low back, they begin to create some instability in that area when they have tight hamstrings and their hips are locked up.
Yeah, it all plays together, and hopefully I can answer this like with where you're going with that. But usually what I'll see is when they come in, I think a lot of it too is just unawareness of how the body works together. Like I think fortunately, if you're doing yoga, like you have that awareness, and meaning you go through motions, you can feel it, because it's just like everything else. Like if you don't go through the motion, it's hard for you to understand. So like that was the biggest basically was for me at least, and then putting the with the educational part of the therapy, athletic training, from all the different mentors I had to go through the yoga, the different movements, the workouts, all the pain to really know how the body, from what words say and what the exercises say to how I felt. And so I apply it together. So a lot of people that come into the clinic, whatever injury it is, and let's just say it's low back pain, they typically don't have that sense of awareness, and because they've never either gone through the exercises, they don't do, some of them do, but some don't. They don't go through, yoga. They don't go through stretching. They tell me, they're like, I don't do anything, or they're minimal. It's like, or maybe they are somewhat active, but it's just walking, or nothing wrong with that. But I just tell them like, look, I go, it's unfortunately, I wish there was a simple answer, but it's like, you got to do a little bit more than that. We got to break up the patterns that the body's used to going through. And so their thought process coming in is, when I start saying, okay, and from day one, everyone gets the same exercises, and it's those three, and there's like four more, and then we do one with the calf stretch it's also includes some hip mobility, because when they're offset, their feet are always going to get offset, and so always heel strikes a little bit different when they're walking. So whole goal is getting them lined back up and get moving, and understanding the relationship of their legs to their body, because a lot of them they have this total unawareness of their legs in relationship to their body as far as the mobility and how that relates to having tight hamstrings and the pull on the pelvis. The calves, actually a lot of people have really super tight calves. They don't realize, when you have tight calves, the Achilles, it rotates your heel. So every time you step forward, you walk forward, you're placing your foot at a different position. So you're already kind of offset a little bit. So there's always, even though our bodies are good at accepting the forces and kind of redirecting with our ability to react, there's that shift, and there's a lot going on. So trying to get them to understand the relationship of their legs, the mobility of their joints, and just kind of basic stuff like that. Because once they can understand that, then they have more of a sense of self-awareness of how that pulls on their low back. And then, because a lot of it's funny, so when we go through all the exercises, then it's always get the same answer, like, so when are we going to start doing the back exercises? I'm like, realistically, we are like, and so then it's more of a mind shift too. Like I have to educate them on it and tell them like, look, don't think of the back as just you sitting there doing some crunches or you know, because I always cause part of it too is I want to know like, what are they thinking? So I'll ask them like, what do you think, you know, a low back exercise is? And they're like, I don't know, you know, just pulling, you know, crunches or because I think it's gonna be like some kind of ab workout. And so that's what, you know, the mass people think about. It's like, okay, I'm gonna go work on my low back, so I'm gonna do some abs or something. Not to say that that's not important, but the reality is, you know, and maybe this goes back to like what you're saying there is like, if your pelvis is offset and they don't have this sense of awareness of their legs and or the restricted motion, what ends up happening is all their bones are out of position. So when the bones are out of position, it threw the muscles out of position. You have this thing called active and passive insufficiency. When your muscles are too lengthened, when I was talking about earlier, how the shoulder gets displaced and that stretch on why so many people have the rotator cuff issues. When your muscles are too long, that's called passive. Meaning your fibers, because your muscle fibers are straight, they can't connect. Like so that's why they're weak. That's why people are weaker in certain areas of the body than others, because they're overstretched. Meaning the muscles is still there, obviously, but it's not getting that connection. Now, active is when someone's too tight. Like when they say, okay, that person's got like a tight hamstring or a hip flex or whatever. Then they're too close. Like there's got to be that congruency where they kind of line up and then you get that solid connection. And so that's what I was trying to show them is like, okay, we got to get your structure, your skeletal system, like the bones back in place. Once we can do that, your muscles can line up. Then that's when you start, like when I was doing like that phase 1 mobility first, flexibility, because you want motion of the joints first. Then you look at the flexibility of the muscles. And because once you get the mobility of the joints, then you can go to the flexibility of the muscles, and it's a lot easier to get them to last, if that makes sense, to get them to do what you're gonna do. Then you can go into your strengthening phase and your balance phase, because it's kind of like even though it sounds so basic, there's a lot of thought process behind it of the tier system of how all the receptors in your body, you know, things work together. And so I think that was the biggest thing is trying to take them back to basics and understanding them, what their own body is to them. And so try to get them to start out with just general motions of their own body, get a kind of a feel, get them connected with their body, and try to get them to say, okay, this is something I've never, you know, they're like, because if you think about it, like they're really basic, but they're also things you don't do on a normal basis. And that it's always the simple things that are easy not to do. So if they're not used to going in those 3 planes of motion, so that was phase 2, the sagittal front to back, the frontal plane side to side or transverse, they're used to always going that same plane of motion. And that's when they say, yeah, I stretch all the time. I'm like, really, what do you do? And they're like, well, you know, that hamstring stretch. And then I'm like, there you go. Because we went through there and we tested him, and he's like, yeah, I don't really do that. But so there's more to than just like one muscle group. And so I always try to get them to think about this and like, okay, and we make a good time out of it, but we'll always, you know, it's like try to get them to know, like, you know, what their thought process has been over the years compared to really understanding what they have the capability of doing. And I think I read a report, and you know, I can wrap it up with this, but it was like basically most people are only operating at 70% of their potential, maybe even 60%. There's still another 30 or 40% that people could be doing, meaning from mobility standpoint to strength to health to energy, everything. If they just understood that, you know, that, and that's kind of where the whole unlocked concept came in, is like, if you could learn these simple principles, you just release a whole new pattern in your body of what it's capable of doing. And because all of a sudden, once your nervous system is intact, here's the deal, is like your muscles are now active again. You have the ability to go through a larger range of motion. You're moving more toxins throughout the body. You're getting more connection to your nervous system. You're opening your body up. Now your organs aren't being crushed, and that's why a lot of people, what we see in the hospital, when I worked in the hospital setting. So I'm talking about going and working in a lot of different settings and where's the experience come from. But then you're not these people that are in disease condition. So then you can relate it to everyone, from the pro athlete to the person in the hospital bed in ICU to the nursing home, and say, okay, this is why this person is suffering from this issue. And when you want to bring it back to approach a physical movement, what can we do simply now to get them to that next level? And so I think, once someone does the basics and just the motion, the stretching, then all of a sudden they turn on a whole new part of their body that they're not used to doing before. And then again, once that happens, then they're more motivated, because once you get rid of start moving around, you get a lot of toxins out of your body. What ends up happening, you get out of that negative acidic body, that state that's bringing us down into that, I call it like the 4 phases of, they have that first phase of like self-doubt, like lack of self-confidence. Then the people that come in our clinic, it's the anxiety, the stress, the depression. The third phase, they're on medications. They start having bowel issues and gut issues and ulcers. And then the fourth phase is disease and death. And then you start to see that consistent pattern of what people go through as far as the way they present. And then you can start saying, okay, I've got this person at this phase. I know how to try to say, okay, here's what you really need to focus on to prevent from going further into that realm.
So good. All right.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, but I think at the end of the day, if majority of people just really try to keep it simple, not like people don't have to know like all the details of it, but just simply keep moving. And I think that was the main point of what you were wanting to talk about anyways, is, even with injuries, like you've got to keep moving, because if not, our system as a whole shuts down.
So good. Thank you so much, Sheldon, for making time to jump in our group.
Oh yeah, appreciate having me. And if anyone has any questions later on, they can always email me, and then or call, whatever, and then get those questions answered in more detail.
Perfect. And then will you post some links to your videos, or send them to me so that we can post them in our group, and people can give those a shot while we're,
for sure,
especially while we're in quarantine and sitting more. And
oh yeah, no, it definitely is. And for what they say, for every solution there's a problem, for every problem there's a solution. It definitely opens up to like more in this whole therapy thing, because now, again, like going back to like sitting here, I'm like, wow, it's a whole nother realm of pain, of tightness, stretching that people are having to face. Because now you're sitting in different surfaces than you're used to going. You're not moving around as much. Maybe you're getting out of the car before, or maybe sitting on different chairs at work or walking or whatnot, gym. And now we're sitting on different surfaces, and our bodies are getting stretched differently. We start having different aches and pains and or reoccurrence of those feelings.
That's definitely for sure. At least I felt that.
But appreciate y'all having me.
Thanks so much. Thanks,
All
guys.
right.
Thanks,
All right,
Sheldon.
see you. Bye.
Bye.